12 men, railway workers, standing on fresh-laid tracks somewhere in Nevada, 1869, tools in hand, faces turned toward the camera. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of historical photograph you'd scroll past without a second thought. Except one of these men has a copper badge pinned to his chest, badge number 237. And in September 2019, archaeologists found that badge in a mass grave 23 feet underground, still attached to his skeleton. The Nevada Department of Transportation had approved highway expansion along Route 80, just north of the old railway corridor. Standard archaeological survey before construction, required by federal law, usually finds nothing but rocks and disappointment. Dr. James Chen had been conducting these surveys for 11 years. Mostly he cataloged Native American pottery shards and wrote reports no one read. But on September 17, 2019, at 2:47 p.m., ground-penetrating radar showed something wrong. The survey site was 3 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by desert that looked the same in every direction. Scrub brush, red dirt, mountains in the distance that shimmered in heat. The old railway tunnel entrance had collapsed decades ago, filled with rubble and sand. According to historical records, the tunnel had been abandoned in 1872, deemed geologically unstable after several collapses. The radar showed a large cavity beneath the collapse site. Not natural, too regular, too deep. Could be an old storage area, James told his team. Railway companies sometimes dug out side chambers for equipment. But something about the radar pattern bothered him. The cavity was too large, and the density readings suggested organic material, a lot of it. They spent 3 days excavating carefully through layered rock and compacted dirt. At 18 feet down, they found the first skeleton, then the second, then 45 more. The bones were arranged in no particular pattern, not buried ceremonially, not positioned carefully. They'd fallen where they died. Some were stacked against the tunnel's western wall, others sprawled in the center, reaching toward where the tunnel entrance had been. All showed the same injury, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, crushed, deliberate, systematic. "This isn't a collapse," James said, kneeling beside the remains. "This is a massacre." The archaeological team worked in shifts for the next week, documenting every detail. Forensic analysis would take months, but preliminary observations painted a disturbing picture. All the victims were male, ages 20-40 based on bone density. All showed signs of malnutrition and repetitive stress injuries consistent with heavy manual labor. And all had died at the same time. No variation in decomposition, no signs some died before others. They'd been killed together, quickly, efficiently, but it was skeleton number 23 that changed everything. James was photographing the remains when he noticed something metallic near the ribcage. He brushed away dirt carefully, revealing a corroded copper disc about 2 inches in diameter. A badge, pinned to what remained of fabric, work clothes, heavy cotton, the kind worn by laborers in the late 1800s. He cleaned the badge carefully with a soft brush. The corrosion had eaten away some of the detail, but the center was still legible. Stamped into the copper in raised numerals, 237. And around the edge, barely visible, Central Pacific Railroad Company. James sat back on his heels, mind racing. The Central Pacific Railroad, one of the 2 companies that built the Transcontinental Railroad, working eastward from California. They'd completed their section in May 1869, meeting the Union Pacific at Promontory Summit, Utah. That was 150 years ago, and this badge had been underground all that time, still pinned to a man's chest, a man who'd been murdered and buried in an abandoned tunnel. James pulled out his phone, photographed the badge from multiple angles, then carefully documented its position relative to the skeleton. The man had been approximately 5'6", based on femur length. Young, late 20s, maybe early 30s. Well-built, strong bone structure despite malnutrition. His skull showed the same crushing blow as the others, but he also showed something different. Chemical burns. The bone of his left arm and ribs had a distinctive pitted texture that James recognized from forensic training. Exposure to caustic chemicals at high heat. The kind of damage caused by explosives, specifically the black powder used in 19th century mining and construction. James stood, walked to the tunnel's collapsed entrance, studied the pattern of rockfall, then walked back to where the bodies lay. 47 men, all facing the same direction, all between the entrance and the back wall, all with the same head trauma. They weren't killed in here, he said to his assistant Maria. They were killed outside, then brought in. The head wounds, those happened first. Then someone sealed them in here and collapsed the tunnel on top of them. Why? To hide them. Make it look like an accident, a tragic cave-in during construction. James looked at the badge in his hand. Number 237, a worker identification number, which meant somewhere there were records, payroll documents, employment rosters, a name attached to this number, a name attached to this skeleton. He called the state archaeological office, reported the findings, requested immediate preservation status for the site. Then he called the University of Nevada's history department, then the Chinese Historical Society of America, because he'd recognized something about the skeletal remains that hadn't been immediately obvious, but was now undeniable. The bone structure, the dental wear patterns, the specific measurements. All 47 skeletons were Chinese laborers, working for the Central Pacific Railroad, killed together, buried together, forgotten for 150 years, until a highway expansion project disturbed their grave. That night, James sat in his hotel room with his laptop open, searching through digitized historical records. The Central Pacific had employed approximately 15,000 Chinese workers at the height of construction. They'd done the most dangerous work, tunneling through mountains, handling explosives, working in conditions that killed dozens every month. Official records were sparse. Chinese workers weren't recorded with the same detail as white workers, often just a number, a wage amount, a note when they departed the workforce. But there were records, payroll ledgers, equipment logs, accident reports. James found the Central Pacific's construction timeline, May 1869, completion month. The section they'd been excavating was along the western Nevada corridor, one of the last sections completed before the famous Golden Spike ceremony. He found tunnel construction records, tunnel designation, Nevada Corridor 6, completion date, May 18, 1869. Status, collapsed, May 20, 1869. Casualties, none recorded. Note, geological instability caused premature closure, none recorded. But James had just counted 47 skeletons, 47 men who didn't exist in any official record, who disappeared from history as completely as if they'd never lived, except for one detail the killers hadn't anticipated. Badge 237, still pinned to a dead man's chest, still carrying a number that connected to records somewhere, a name, a story, evidence that these 47 men had lived, had worked, had died, and had been murdered to cover something up. James looked at the photograph he'd taken of the badge, zoomed in on the number. 237. Somewhere in archived records, probably in Sacramento or Washington, D.C., there was a payroll ledger with that number, a name, maybe even a photograph. He started drafting emails to archivists, historians, anyone who might have access to Central Pacific employment records from 1869. Because whoever these men were, they deserved more than an anonymous grave in a collapsed tunnel. They deserved their names back, and James was going to find them. The email from the Library of Congress arrived at 3:17 a.m., 3 weeks after James had sent his inquiry. He'd been dreaming about the tunnel, about 47 men facing a wall of collapsed rock, realizing too late that the entrance had been sealed behind them. He woke to his phone buzzing, heart still racing from the dream, and saw the subject line, Central Pacific Railroad Employment Records, badge number 237, found. James sat up in bed, opened the email with hands that weren't entirely steady. Dr. Chen, your request crossed my desk this morning. We have extensive Central Pacific payroll ledgers in our Western Expansion collection, most never fully digitized. I spent the afternoon going through May 1869 records manually. Badge number 237, worker named Chen Wei, age 23, hired March 14, 1867. Last payment recorded May 19, 1869. Wages owed at termination, $147.50, 3 months unpaid. Status marked, departed, no forwarding address. I'm also attaching something you'll want to see. We have a photograph. Margaret Yates, senior archivist. James opened the attachment. His laptop screen filled with a high-resolution scan of a photograph he recognized immediately, the same railway construction image he'd seen dozens of times in historical archives. 12 Chinese workers standing on fresh-laid tracks somewhere in the Nevada desert. Railway ties visible in the foreground, mountains in the background, the kind of documentation-shot railroad companies took to record progress. But this scan was different, higher quality than the public archives version. And when James zoomed in on the workers' faces, he could see details that had been lost in lower resolution scans, including a copper badge pinned to one worker's chest in the back row, badge number 237. James enlarged the image until the man's face filled his screen. Young, lean, strong cheekbones, eyes looking directly at the camera with an expression that was neither smiling nor solemn, just steady, present, real. The kind of face you'd scroll past in a history book without a second thought because history books are full of faces, and after a while they all blur together into the past without being people. Except Chen Wei wasn't the past. He was right there on James's screen, 23 years old, standing in sunshine on fresh-laid tracks, wearing badge 237, maybe 6 hours away from being murdered and buried in a tunnel that would stay collapsed for 150 years. James screenshotted the image, sent it to the forensic artist who'd been working on the skeletal reconstruction. Then he called Margaret Yates at the Library of Congress, even though it was 3:30 a.m. in Nevada and 6:30 a.m. in Washington, D.C. She answered on the second ring. "Dr. Chen, I had a feeling you'd call early. You said May 19th was his last payment. What does that mean? Was he fired?" "That's what's interesting. The payroll ledger has a notation system. Most departures are marked with a code, F for fired, Q for quit, T for transferred to different section. But Chen Wei's entry just says departed with no code. And there's a supervisor signature I've never seen on any other entry." "Whose signature?" "Edmund Whitmore. He was the Western Section Superintendent, directly below Leland Stanford in the company hierarchy. He didn't usually sign off on individual worker terminations. That was foreman duty. But his signature is on Chen Wei's departure record and 46 other Chinese workers' records, all dated May 19, 1869, all marked departed, all with wages owed." James felt his stomach tighten. 47 total? 47 total, all from the same work crew. Nevada Corridor Section 6, the same section where James had found 47 skeletons. "I need everything you have on those workers. Names, badge numbers, wages owed, any personal information." "Already pulling it. But Dr. Chen, there's something else you need to understand about Central Pacific records. They're selective. Chinese workers weren't documented the same way white workers were. We have home addresses for white employees, family contacts, medical records, even photographs in some cases. For Chinese workers, we're lucky to have a name. Most are just numbers. But we have a name, Chen Wei. That's more than we had yesterday." "It is, and I found something else while going through the photography archives." Margaret's voice shifted, became quieter. "There are 2 versions of this photograph." "What do you mean, 2 versions?" "The one I sent you. That's from the original glass plate negative, never publicly released. But there's another version in our public collection. Same photograph, same location, but digitally altered. Someone removed all the badges, cleaned up the workers' clothes so they look less worn, softened the facial expressions, made it look like a triumphant moment instead of..." She paused. "Instead of what it actually was." "When was it altered?" "Hard to say. The manipulation is old, probably done during the original printing process, not digitally, which means someone decided back in 1869 that the real version of this photograph shouldn't be seen, that people shouldn't see the badges, shouldn't see how exhausted these men looked, shouldn't see whatever truth was visible in their faces." James looked at Chen Wei's face on his screen, at the steady, direct gaze, at the badge visible on his chest, evidence, documentation, proof that he'd existed, that he'd worked, that he'd been there. They tried to erase him from the photograph, James said, and they tried to erase him from the records, but they missed things. The original glass plate, the payroll ledger, the fact that someone had to sign off on 47 workers disappearing on the same day. Margaret exhaled slowly. Dr. Chen, I've been working with these archives for 20 years. I've never seen anything like this. It's systematic, deliberate. Someone wanted these men gone from history. And now they're in my excavation site, with crushed skulls. Silence on the line. Then, what are you going to do? James didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the photograph, at Chen Wei's face. 23 years old, 3 months unpaid wages, badge 237, dead 6 hours after this photo was taken, buried in a tunnel, erased from history. Except he hadn't been completely erased, because someone had kept the original photograph, had filed it away in a glass plate archive that survived 150 years, had maintained payroll records that documented the disappearance, had left breadcrumbs, maybe accidentally, maybe deliberately, that connected 1869 to 2019. I'm going to tell his story, James said finally. I'm going to find out who Edmund Whitmore was, why he signed off on this, what happened that day. And I'm going to figure out how 47 men could disappear without anyone noticing. People noticed, Margaret said quietly. Chinese newspapers in San Francisco ran articles about missing workers. Families sent letters asking about their sons and husbands, but the Central Pacific responded the same way to every inquiry. Worker departed voluntarily, no forwarding information available. The families didn't believe it. But what could they do? They were immigrants, non-citizens. They had no legal standing, and the railroad company controlled everything: the workers, the records, the narrative. James's jaw clenched. So they got away with it. They got away with it for 150 years, until you started digging. After the call ended, James sat with his laptop, looking at Chen Wei's face. The photograph had been taken in morning light. You could tell from the angle of shadows, which meant Chen Wei had stood on those tracks, wearing badge 237, sometime between dawn and noon on May 19, 1869. The official completion ceremony happened at 12:47 p.m. that same day. The famous golden spike, champagne toasts, telegraph messages to the nation, Leland Stanford's speech about American progress and manifest destiny. But before any of that happened, 3,000 Chinese workers were removed from the ceremony site, dismissed, told their wages would be paid in due time, told to clear out so the photographs would show only white workers and executives celebrating. And 47 of those workers, Chen Wei's crew, were sent to complete one final section before receiving payment. Tunnel, Nevada, Corridor 6. James pulled up his excavation notes. The tunnel's entrance showed signs of intentional collapse. Explosives set at structural support points, timed to bring down the entire entrance section simultaneously. Professional demolition work, not an accident. And the bodies inside showed they'd been murdered before the tunnel was sealed, which meant someone killed 47 men, then collapsed a tunnel on top of them to hide the evidence. Someone who had the authority to order a demolition. Someone who had access to explosives and demolition expertise. Someone who needed 47 workers to disappear quickly and quietly. James opened a new search window typed, Edmund Whitmore, Central Pacific Railroad Superintendent. The first result was a biography from a railroad history website. James read it with growing horror. Edmund Whitmore, 1827 to 1891. Central Pacific Railroad Western Section Superintendent, 1867-1870. Previously served as Union Army combat engineer during Civil War, specializing in demolition and fortification. After the war, recruited by Central Pacific to oversee tunnel construction through the Sierra Nevada mountains. Known for aggressive cost-cutting measures and efficient project management, received company commendations for completing Western Section under budget and ahead of schedule. After railroad completion, served as consultant for various mining and railroad projects. Died 1891, buried with full honors in Sacramento. Combat engineer, demolition specialist, cost-cutting measures, under budget. James felt cold. The pieces were fitting together in a way that made horrible sense. Chen Wei and his crew were owed 3 months' wages, $147.50 each, 47 workers. That was $6,932.50 total, equivalent to roughly $150,000 in 2019 dollars. And Edmund Whitmore had a reputation for finishing projects under budget. What if under budget meant not paying your workers? What if efficient project management meant murdering them so they couldn't collect wages? James's phone rang. Maria, his assistant from the excavation team. James, you need to get down here. Now. What's wrong? We just got a call from the Nevada Department of Transportation. They're suspending our dig. On what grounds? They said we need additional environmental clearances. Something about potential contamination from old railway chemicals. They want us off-site by tomorrow pending review. That's insane. We've been working for 3 weeks. Why now? I don't know. But there's more. A law firm called an hour ago, representing the modern successor company to Central Pacific Railroad. They're claiming the tunnel site is on historical railroad right-of-way property, and we're trespassing. That's ridiculous. This is state highway land. They have lawyers who say otherwise. James, I think someone doesn't want us digging anymore. James looked at Chen Wei's face on his screen, at badge 237, at the evidence that had survived 150 years. Start photographing everything, he said. Document every skeleton, every artifact, every measurement. Do it now, before they can stop us. I'm driving down there. He was halfway to his car when his phone buzzed again. Email from Margaret Yates. Subject line, you need to see this. One attachment, another photograph. Different location. Inside a building this time. A group of men in suits standing around a table. Official looking. Corporate photograph from the 1860s. The caption beneath the image read, Central Pacific Railroad Executive Board, May 1869. Left to right. Leland Stanford, President. Collis Huntington, Vice President. Mark Hopkins, Treasurer. Charles Crocker, Construction Supervisor. Edmund Whitmore, Western Superintendent. James zoomed in on Edmund Whitmore's face. Stern, confident, successful. A man who'd built a transcontinental railroad and received commendations for it. And standing behind him, partially visible in the photograph's edge, was another man, younger, wearing a work foreman's clothes, and on his chest, a badge. James enlarged the badge as much as resolution allowed. Number 186. He pulled up his excavation notes, scanned through the skeletal inventory. Skeleton number 14. Male, age 25-30. Badge found near remains. Number 186. Another one of the 47. This man had been in the photograph with the executives, had been visible in company records, had existed in official documentation, and then someone had killed him and buried him in a tunnel. James's hands were shaking as he forwarded the photograph to Maria. Then he opened his email and started composing a message to every historian, journalist, and academic contact he had. Because whoever had tried to erase Chen Wei and his crew from history had failed. The badges had survived. The bones had survived. The photographs had survived. And James was about to make sure the whole world knew what had happened in May 1869. He hit send on the first email, started the second, reached for his car keys. His phone rang one more time. Unknown number. He answered. Dr. Chen? A man's voice. Professional. Calm. My name is Richard Pemberton. I'm Chief Counsel for Western Rail Holdings, successor company to Central Pacific Railroad. We need to talk about your excavation. We're prepared to offer you a generous consulting fee in exchange for delayed publication of your findings pending proper company review. I think you'll find our offer very reasonable. James looked at Chen Wei's face on his laptop screen. 23 years old, badge 237, murdered for $147.50 in unpaid wages. No, he said. Dr. Chen, I don't think you understand the situation. We have significant resources, legal, financial, political. Your excavation is on questionable legal ground. Your findings could be challenged. Your reputation could be... I have 47 skeletons, James interrupted. I have their names. I have photographs showing them alive. I have payroll records showing they were murdered to avoid paying wages, and I have evidence that your predecessor company covered it up. So no, I'm not delaying anything, I'm not taking your money, and I'm not letting you bury these men a second time." He hung up. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing hard, wondering if he'd just made a catastrophic mistake. If Western Rail Holdings had the power to destroy his career, his credibility, his entire life's work. Then he looked at Chen Wei's face again, at the steady, direct gaze, at the evidence that had survived 150 years. Some things were worth fighting for. James grabbed his laptop, his phone, his excavation notes, and headed for the door. He was halfway down the hallway when his phone lit up with a notification. Email from Richard Pemberton. Subject line, "Final warning." James deleted it without opening. Then he got in his car and drove toward the excavation site, where 47 men were waiting for someone to tell their story. He didn't notice the black SUV that pulled out behind him 3 blocks later, or the second vehicle that joined it at the highway on-ramp, or the fact that both vehicles had tinted windows and no license plates. May 19th, 1869. Dawn. Chen Wei stood on fresh-laid tracks, badge 237 pinned to his chest, and looked directly into the camera lens. The photographer, a white man whose name Chen Wei didn't know, had positioned 12 workers in 2 rows. "Don't move," the photographer said in English, then repeated in broken Cantonese, "Bu Dong, stay still." Chen Wei stayed still. Behind him, the Nevada desert stretched toward mountains that caught morning light. In front of him, tracks ran east and west, 3,000 miles of iron connecting 2 oceans. He'd helped lay 500 miles of those tracks over the past 2 years, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, $1.50 per day when white workers made $3, and for the last 3 months, no payment at all. The camera clicked. The photographer nodded. "Good. Finished." Chen Wei and the others relaxed, stepped off the tracks. Around them, 3,000 other Chinese workers were breaking camp, packing tools, preparing for whatever came next. The railroad was complete. Last spike would be driven today at Promontory Summit, 23 miles east. Telegraph wires were already strung. Politicians were coming. Photographers, journalists. The whole nation would be watching, but none of them would see the Chinese workers. That order had come down yesterday. All Chinese laborers were to clear out before the ceremony. For photographic consistency, the foreman had explained, which meant white men built this railroad, according to the pictures that would appear in newspapers. The 15,000 Chinese workers who'd actually done most of the tunneling, most of the blasting, most of the dying, they weren't part of the official story. Fine. Chen Wei didn't care about ceremonies. He cared about the $147.50 he was owed, 3 months' wages. The money he'd promised to send home to Guangdong province, where his mother waited, where his younger brother needed funds for school, where his entire family was counting on him to fulfill the promise he'd made when he'd left 4 years ago. "I'll send money. I'll make our sacrifice worth it." He'd sent money regularly for 2 years. Then 3 months ago, payments stopped. "Temporary delay," the foreman said. "You'll get everything when the railroad's complete." The railroad was complete. Around noon, a foreman named Sullivan gathered Chen Wei's work crew, 47 men total, all Chinese, all badge numbers in the 200s. "You boys want your wages?" Sullivan asked. Everyone nodded. "There's one more tunnel needs finishing. Nevada Corridor 6 about 3 miles south. Small job. Afternoon's work. You complete that, you get full payment tonight. 3 months back pay, plus completion bonus. $20 extra. $20 extra." That was 2 weeks additional wages. Chen Wei looked at the other workers. Everyone was calculating the same math. $167.50 total. More money than most of them had ever held at once. "We complete tunnel. You pay tonight?" Chen Wei asked in careful English. "On my word," Sullivan said. "Boss already approved the funds. You finish the work, you get paid in cash before sundown. Then you're free to go wherever you want." Free to go. After 2 years of being told where to work, when to sleep, what to eat from the company store at inflated prices. Free to go meant Chen Wei could take his wages, travel to San Francisco, book passage home to China, or stay in America, send the money home, find other work. Freedom and money, both at once, just for one afternoon's work. "We do it," Chen Wei said. The crew gathered their tools, picks, shovels, hammers, blasting powder. Sullivan led them south, away from the main line, into desert scrubland where old survey routes had been abandoned for better paths. The tunnel entrance was barely visible, dug into a hillside, reinforced with timber supports that looked relatively new. "Previous crews started this, then we redirected the route," Sullivan explained. "But the company wants it completed properly. Can't leave half-finished tunnels. Bad for the maps." Chen Wei walked to the tunnel entrance, peered inside. It extended maybe 200 feet into the hillside, straight passage, good timber work, no obvious collapses or weak points. Easy work. They could finish in 3 hours, maybe 4. He looked at his crew. Young men mostly, early 20s. A few older. There was Zhang, who was 35, who had a wife and 3 children waiting in Canton. There was Liu, who'd survived the Summit Tunnel explosion that killed 11 workers last year. There was Wang, only 19, whose brother had died of pneumonia during the winter work. Badge numbers: 186, 199, 203, 214, 221, 237, 241, 255, 268, 273, 291, 304. 47 men who'd survived 2 years of the hardest, most dangerous work in America, who'd blasted through mountains of solid granite, who'd hung in wicker baskets over 1,000-foot cliffs to set explosives, who'd worked through Nevada winters and desert summers, who'd watched friends die in cave-ins, explosions, avalanches, and now they were 3 hours from freedom and payment. "Start working," Sullivan said. "I'll be back before sunset to inspect the work and bring your wages." He smiled. "Don't worry, boys. Company keeps its promises." He left. The crew divided into teams. Chen Wei's group went deepest into the tunnel, extending the excavation. Others reinforced supports, cleared debris, smoothed the walls. The work was familiar, almost meditative after 2 years of practice. Pick strikes, rock falls, shovel scoops, timber hammering. Around 2 p.m., they reached the tunnel's planned endpoint. Zhang found Chen Wei, showed him the survey mark carved into stone. "This is how far company wanted. We're done." Chen Wei wiped sweat from his face, looked back toward the entrance. Sunlight visible 200 feet away. Freedom. Payment. Home. "Pack tools," he said in Cantonese. "We finish early. Maybe get paid early." The crew gathered equipment, started walking toward the entrance. Chen Wei was near the back, helping Wang carry timber when he heard it. Not an explosion. Not yet. Just voices. Outside. Urgent. Then silence. Then nothing. Chen Wei stopped walking. "Did you hear?" The explosion came from the entrance. Not inside the tunnel. Outside. At the supports. The timber framework around the entrance collapsed inward, bringing down tons of rock. Dust billowed through the tunnel in a choking wave. Men screamed. Someone grabbed Chen Wei's arm, pulled him backward as rocks fell where he'd been standing. When the dust cleared enough to see, the entrance was gone, completely sealed, just a wall of collapsed rock and timber where sunlight had been. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Everyone stared at the cave-in, minds refusing to process what had happened. Then Zhang said quietly in Cantonese, "They sealed us in. Not an accident. Not a collapse. Sealed." Someone had set explosives at the entrance supports. Someone had timed the blast for when the crew was deep inside. Someone had deliberately trapped 47 men in a tunnel with no exit. Chen Wei touched the wall where the entrance had been. Stone. Solid. Tons of it. They'd need days to dig through. Weeks, maybe. And they had no food, limited water, no light except the lanterns they'd brought for working. Liu started clawing at the rocks with his bare hands. "Help me. We can dig out. We can—" "Stop," Chen Wei said. His voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Listen." Everyone stopped. Listened. From beyond the sealed entrance, muffled but unmistakable. Footsteps. Someone walking away from the tunnel. not running, not hurrying, just walking, methodical, calm, and then nothing. Wang started crying. Zhang was breathing too fast, hands shaking. Someone was praying in Taishanese. Someone else was pounding on the rock wall, screaming for help in English, Chinese, any language that might make someone come back. Chen Wei looked at his crew. 47 men, badge numbers from 186 to 304, 2 years of work, 3 months unpaid wages, one photograph taken that morning, showing their faces, documenting that they'd existed, and now they were buried in a tunnel that wasn't on any map, in a hillside nobody would excavate, with wages nobody would pay. "They're not coming back," he said quietly. Zhang looked at him. "What?" "The wages, the payment, the one last job." Chen Wei felt something cold settling in his chest. Understanding. Terrible, complete understanding. They never planned to pay us. This was the plan. Get us somewhere isolated. Seal us in. Save the money. We're Chinese. We're not citizens. Nobody will investigate. Nobody will ask questions. We'll just be 47 workers who departed voluntarily from the payroll. "No," Wang said. "No, they wouldn't." "They would," Zhang interrupted. His voice had gone flat. Dead. "Of course they would. 47 workers at 3 months' wages each. That's," he calculated in his head, "almost $7,000 saved. Why pay money you don't have to pay? Especially to Chinese workers who have no legal standing, no citizenship, no recourse." "We're human beings," Liu said, but his voice cracked. Even he didn't sound convinced that mattered. Chen Wei walked deeper into the tunnel, away from the sealed entrance, away from the sounds of men crying and praying and breaking down. He found the survey mark that showed they'd reached the planned endpoint. He touched it. The tunnel had never needed finishing. It was already complete. The one last job had been pure fiction, just a story to get them isolated, to get them into a place where 47 men could disappear without witnesses. He thought about the photograph taken that morning. 12 workers on fresh tracks, badge 237 visible on his chest. Would that photograph survive? Would anyone ever see it? Would anyone know that Chen Wei had existed, had worked, had stood there on May 19, 1869, thinking about the money he'd send home, the freedom he'd earn, the promises he'd keep? Or would the photograph be destroyed too? Conveniently lost? Accidentally damaged? He thought about his mother in Guangdong province, still waiting for money that would never come. His younger brother, counting on school fees that would never arrive. His entire family, waiting for the son who'd promised to make their sacrifice worthwhile. He'd failed them, not through laziness or incompetence, but because someone with power had decided 47 Chinese lives were worth less than $7,000. Behind him, the sounds of desperation were fading. Men were realizing what Chen Wei had already understood. There was no escape. The entrance was tons of collapsed rock. They had no tools strong enough to dig through solid stone. They had maybe 8 hours of lantern oil. They had no food. They had the small water canteens they'd brought for an afternoon's work. They had days, maybe. A week if they were unlucky enough to survive that long in darkness. Chen Wei returned to the group. Everyone was sitting now. The frantic digging had stopped. The screaming had stopped. Now there was just silence and the sound of men breathing in enclosed space. "We should write something," Zhang said quietly. "Leave a record, so someone knows what happened." "Who's going to find it?" Liu asked bitterly. "Nobody's coming to this tunnel. It's not on the railroad line. It's not part of any construction project. They'll never excavate here. In 100 years, nobody will even know this tunnel exists." "We'll know," Chen Wei said. He pulled out a small knife he kept for cutting rope, walked to the smooth stone wall, started carving in the rock. He carved badge numbers, 186, 199, 203, 214, his own, 237, all 47 numbers, scratched into stone with a blade that barely marked the surface. It would take hours. His hands were already bleeding from gripping the knife, but he carved anyway, because maybe in 100 years, maybe in 200 years, someone would excavate this tunnel, would find bones, would find these numbers, would know that 47 Chinese workers had existed, had been here, had died here, would know their deaths hadn't been accident, hadn't been random, had been calculated, deliberate, profitable. Zhang joined him, carving names in Chinese characters. Wang carved a prayer. Others carved messages to families who would never read them. And slowly, as the lantern oil burned lower, as the air grew stale, as the reality of their situation became undeniable, the men of Tunnel Nevada Corridor 6 carved their existence into stone. Chen Wei finished carving badge 237, touched it with bloody fingers, thought about the photograph from that morning, about his mother, about promises. The lanterns were going out now, one by one, darkness coming. He heard footsteps outside again, someone returning to the collapsed entrance. For a moment, one stupid, desperate moment, Chen Wei felt hope. Maybe Sullivan had come back. Maybe there'd been a mistake. Maybe... The second explosion came from deep in the tunnel, not at the entrance, at the support pillars midway through. Someone had planted charges inside the tunnel too. Time to go off hours after the entrance collapsed. Time to bring down the entire tunnel structure, to make sure no one survived, to make sure rescue would be impossible even if someone tried. The ceiling came down. Chen Wei saw rocks falling, heard timber splintering, felt something huge strike his skull from behind. Then darkness, real darkness, and nothing, and silence. And May 19th, 1869 ended for 47 men who would remain buried in an unmarked tunnel for 150 years. Until a highway expansion project. Until an archaeologist named James Chen. Until badge 237 was found, still pinned to bones, still carrying a number that meant someone had existed, still carrying proof that someone had murdered them. James lost the black SUVs somewhere around mile marker 84 on I-80, taking an exit that led to a rural road network the GPS couldn't track. He drove for 20 minutes with his heart hammering, checking mirrors obsessively, before finally pulling into a truck stop parking lot and sitting in darkness with his engine off. His phone had been buzzing constantly. Texts from Maria, calls from the Nevada Archaeological Office, emails from Western Rail Holdings' legal team, and one voicemail from a number he didn't recognize, just heavy breathing and a click. He ignored all of it. Instead, he opened his laptop, connected to the truck stop's public Wi-Fi, and uploaded every file he had to 3 separate cloud servers: excavation photographs, skeletal analysis reports, badge documentation, payroll records from the Library of Congress, the photograph of Chen Wei's face, everything. If they killed him tonight, and the SUVs with no license plates suggested that was a real possibility, the evidence would survive. That was what mattered. That was what Chen Wei and 46 others had died for. Evidence that survived when they couldn't. Once the uploads finished, James opened the geological survey database he'd been researching before the confrontation call. Central Pacific Railroad construction records, 1863-1869. Tunnel excavations, section completions, worker assignments. He'd been looking at Tunnel Nevada Corridor 6, where he'd found Chen Wei, but now he was looking at the broader pattern, all the tunnels, all the sections, all the unexplained collapses that had been marked in official records. Tunnel Sierra Nevada, 3. Collapsed June 1867. Geological instability. 0 casualties recorded. Tunnel Wyoming Corridor 8. Collapsed August 1868. Structural failure. 0 casualties recorded. Tunnel Utah. Section 12. Collapsed February 1869. Premature detonation during construction. 0 casualties recorded. 0 casualties. Every time. Which would be remarkable given that tunnel construction was one of the most dangerous jobs in 19th century America. Collapses usually killed dozens of workers. That was why companies kept such detailed death records, for liability purposes, for insurance claims, for documentation, unless the deaths weren't accidents, unless they were deliberate, unless recording casualties would raise questions about why so many workers died in isolated incidents, right when wages were due. James pulled up a map, marked the location of every recorded tunnel collapse along the Central Pacific route between 1866 and 1869. Then he overlaid it with a timeline of payroll records Margaret Yates had sent him. The pattern emerged immediately. Every collapse happened within days of a scheduled payment period. Every collapse involved Chinese work crews. Every collapse was ruled accidental, with 0 recorded casualties despite dozens of workers being assigned to each tunnel section. And every collapse showed the same geological signature James had documented at Nevada Corridor 6. Explosive charges set at structural support points. Professional demolition work, not accidents. He counted the incidents. 9 major tunnel collapses, 5 smaller cave-ins, 3 documented rockslide incidents that destroyed worker camps, 17 locations where workers had disappeared. If Nevada Corridor 6 had 47 victims, and the other sites followed similar patterns, James did the math. Conservative estimate, 40 workers per incident, 17 incidents, 680 workers. But Margaret's payroll records showed gaps that didn't correspond to any documented incidents. Workers marked departed voluntarily in clusters, 50 or 60 at a time, with no explanation. Just signatures. Edmund Whitmore's signature, authorizing removal from payroll. James looked at the clusters, added them to his estimate. 800 workers, maybe more. Maybe as many as 1,200 Chinese laborers who'd been marked as departed from Central Pacific employment between 1866 and 1869. Workers who'd never received final wages. Workers whose families had sent letters asking about them, receiving form responses about voluntary departure. Workers who'd been murdered so the railroad company could finish under budget. James sat back, staring at the numbers on his screen. Not 47 victims, not even 100. Potentially 1,200 men killed across 4 years. Systematically, efficiently, profitably. This wasn't a massacre. This was industrial genocide. His phone rang. Margaret Yates. He answered. "James, where are you?" "I've been getting calls from Western Rail Holdings. They're threatening the Library of Congress with legal action for releasing proprietary historical records without authorization. They're claiming the payroll documents are protected corporate information." "That's insane. Those records are 150 years old. They're public historical documents. They're claiming direct corporate lineage from Central Pacific gives them ownership of all historical business records, and they have lawyers who specialize in exactly this kind of archival suppression." Margaret's voice was tight. "James, they're not just trying to stop you. They're trying to make the evidence disappear. They've filed injunctions to prevent me from releasing any additional documents. They're demanding we return all materials to their custody for proper preservation. Which means destruction. Which means we'll never see them again. James, I've worked in archives for 20 years. I've seen corporations bury uncomfortable histories before. But never like this. Never with this level of aggression." James looked at his laptop screen. 800 workers. 1,200. Numbers that kept growing the more he researched. "Margaret, I need you to send me every single document you have. Everything. Right now, before they can stop you." "I can't. The injunction is already in effect. If I release anything else, I'll face criminal charges for theft of corporate property." "Then leak it. Anonymously. Send it to journalists, historians, academic databases. Send it everywhere so they can't suppress all of it." Silence on the line. Then, "I'm a librarian, James. I preserve records. I don't break laws. You're preserving the truth about 1,200 murders. Sometimes preserving truth means breaking unjust laws." 1,200? Margaret's voice cracked. "You found evidence of 1,200? At least. Probably more. Every tunnel collapse, every geological incident, every cluster of workers marked departed voluntarily. It's all the same pattern. Kill them, bury them, delete them from records, save money." James felt exhausted, angry, overwhelmed. "Margaret, if we don't get this evidence out now, Western Rail Holdings will suppress everything. They'll bury the bodies a second time, and those 1,200 men will stay erased from history forever." Another silence. Then Margaret said quietly, "I'll send what I can. But James, you need to understand something. These people have unlimited resources. They own politicians. They fund archaeological departments. They control historical preservation boards. Even if you release everything, they'll fight it. They'll discredit you. They'll claim forgery, manipulation, academic misconduct. They'll destroy your career and make the evidence meaningless. Maybe, but I have Chen Wei's badge. I have his bones. I have his face in a photograph. I have physical proof they can't destroy. James looked at the image on his screen. 12 men on railway tracks. Badge 237 visible on Chen Wei's chest. They can discredit documents. They can't discredit archaeology. They can if they control the excavation site. Have you checked on your team recently? James's stomach dropped. He pulled up his text messages from Maria. The most recent one, sent 20 minutes ago. Police just arrived with court order. Excavation suspended pending ownership dispute. They're covering everything with tarps and posting guards. We're locked out. No, James whispered. They're sealing the site, Margaret said. Making sure no one can document anything else. Making sure your 47 bodies can't be properly analyzed, can't be DNA tested, can't be definitively connected to the historical records. Without the physical evidence, all you have are old photographs and payroll documents they're claiming are fraudulent. James started his car. I'm going back there. James, they're not burying them again. Not while I'm alive. He hung up and drove. The excavation site was lit up like a stadium when James arrived at 11:47 p.m. Portable floodlights, 2 police cars, 3 security vehicles, and a semi-trailer truck parked near the tunnel entrance with historical artifact preservation stenciled on the side. They were moving the bones. James parked far enough away to avoid immediate attention and watched through binoculars. Men in hazmat suits were carefully excavating the remaining skeletons. His team's work, being completed by corporate contractors. Each skeleton was being placed in individual sealed containers, loaded into the truck, documented, cataloged, removed. To where? A proper forensic facility? Or a crematorium? Or maybe just scattered in unmarked locations where no archaeologist would ever find them. James pulled out his phone, started recording video, zoomed in on the truck, on the workers, on the police officers who were facilitating corporate theft of archaeological evidence. Then he noticed the second truck, smaller, also marked historical preservation, and workers were loading something else, not bones, equipment, his team's equipment, cameras, measurement tools, documentation tablets, everything that contained evidence. They weren't just taking the bodies, they were taking every piece of evidence that proved the excavation had happened. James's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Stop recording. Drive away. Last warning. He looked around. How did they know he was recording? Then he saw it. A security guard on the excavation site's perimeter, looking directly at his car through night vision binoculars, and speaking into a radio. The 2 SUVs from earlier appeared at the access road entrance, blocking his exit. James dropped his phone, started his engine, and drove straight toward the excavation site instead of away. Past the surprised security guard, past the police cars, directly to the semi-trailer where they were loading Chen Wei's remains. He slammed his car into park, jumped out before anyone could react, and ran to the nearest sealed container. Pulled it open. Inside, bones arranged carefully on foam padding. A copper badge placed beside them. Badge 237. Stop! Someone grabbed his arm. Security guard. Big guy. Sir, this is a restricted archaeological site. You need to leave immediately. I'm the archaeologist who discovered this site, James said. These are my excavations. You're stealing evidence of a mass murder. We have a court order authorizing preservation and removal of historical materials. You're the one trespassing on corporate property. This is state highway land. Was state highway land. Historical Railway Corridor Act of 1992 grants preservation rights to successor railway companies for archaeological sites on original rail corridors. Western Rail Holdings owns this land. You're trespassing. The guard tightened his grip. Now leave, or I call the police. James looked at the police officers standing 20 feet away, watching. They weren't going to help. They were already helping. The wrong side. He pulled his arm free, walked back to his car, sat inside, watched them load the last of the containers, watched the truck drive away with 47 skeletons, taking Chen Wei and his crew to whatever destination Western Rail Holdings had planned. Watched evidence disappear. His phone rang. Margaret Yates again. They got a court order, she said. All Central Pacific Railroad documents are being seized for authentication review. We have to surrender everything by tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, James. I tried. What about the digital copies? They're claiming those are unauthorized reproductions of copyrighted corporate materials. They're demanding we delete all scans and digital records. Margaret sounded defeated. James, they're winning. They have the law on their side. They have the resources. They have the power. We have nothing. James looked at his laptop on the passenger seat, at the files he'd uploaded, at the pattern he'd discovered. 17 sites, 1,200 victims, 150 years of cover-up. We have the truth, he said. Truth doesn't matter if no one hears it, and they're making sure no one hears it. James drove away from the excavation site, watching in his rearview mirror as the floodlights went dark, as the police cars left, as the security vehicles followed the trucks carrying evidence to locations unknown. He drove until he reached a 24-hour diner, sat in a corner booth with his laptop, connected to Wi-Fi, started writing. Not an academic paper, not a research report, not a carefully footnoted archaeological analysis. A story. The story of Chen Wei, age 23, badge 237, who stood on fresh-laid railroad tracks on May 19, 1869, and looked directly into a camera lens, who'd promised his mother he'd send money, who'd worked for 2 years building a transcontinental railroad, who'd been lured into a tunnel with 46 other men and murdered for $147.50 in unpaid wages. James wrote about Edmund Whitmore, Union Army combat engineer, demolition specialist, Western Section superintendent, who'd signed termination orders for workers he'd already killed, who'd saved Central Pacific Railroad nearly $200,000 by systematically murdering Chinese laborers instead of paying them. He wrote about the pattern: 17 sites, 1,200 victims, 150 years of silence. And he wrote about Western Rail Holdings, modern successor company, who was spending millions to suppress evidence of crimes committed by their corporate ancestors, who controlled politicians, judges, police departments, who could make evidence disappear as easily as Edmund Whitmore had made workers disappear. He posted it to every social media platform he had, sent it to 50 journalists, uploaded it to academic forums, historical societies, Chinese American advocacy groups, made it impossible to delete completely because it existed everywhere simultaneously. Then he attached the photograph: 12 men on railway tracks, badge 237 visible on Chen Wei's chest, 12 faces looking at the camera, 12 men who'd be dead within hours, and he attached the payroll records showing their names: Chen Wei, Zhang Lin, Liu Huang, Wang Bo, all 47 names Margaret had found before the court order, all 47 men who'd existed, who'd worked, who'd been murdered. He hit post at 3:17 a.m. By dawn, the story had been shared 50,000 times. By noon, major news networks were covering it. By evening, Western Rail Holdings had issued a statement calling James's claims unsubstantiated conspiracy theories promoted by a disgraced archaeologist with a history of academic misconduct. And by midnight, James received an email from an address he didn't recognize. Subject line: "We found another site." Body: ground-penetrating radar survey near Union Pacific Construction Corridor, Wyoming. Cavity 23 feet underground. Estimated 60-plus skeletons. Same explosive signature. Same timeline. September 1868. We're not letting them cover this one up. Come to coordinates below if you want to help excavate before they shut us down. James looked at the coordinates. Wyoming, 8 hours drive. He closed his laptop, got in his car, and started driving. Behind him, somewhere in Nevada, 47 skeletons were disappearing into corporate storage. Ahead of him, in Wyoming, 60 more were waiting to be found. And across 3,000 miles of Transcontinental Railroad corridor, maybe 1,000 more lay buried. Chinese workers who'd built America's greatest 19th century achievement and been erased from the celebration. But erasure only works in silence. And James Chen wasn't being silent anymore.